It was just another busy evening at Harvest Grill, a small but popular diner tucked into a quiet corner of the city. The place smelled like fresh bread and grilled meat, and the sound of laughter mixed with clinking plates filled the air. People came here for the food, but they stayed because of the feel. Warm, familiar, like home. Behind the counter, a new face had joined the team. His name tag read Danny. He wasn't tall or flashy, just a regular guy with tired eyes and hands that looked like they hadn't held a tray before. No one gave him much thought. There were always new hires at this branch, especially since it wasn't the fanciest location. Most didn't last long, but Danny worked hard. He showed up early, cleaned tables without being asked, and smiled even when things got hectic. He listened more than he talked, which made people talk around him more freely. And he watched, really watched, what was going on around him. What most didn't know was that Danny wasn't just another job seeker looking to make ends meet. His real name was Daniel Mercer, CEO of the entire Harvest Grill chain. A self-made man who built his empire from scratch, Daniel had everything money could buy, except one thing: truth. He wanted to see how the company was really doing, not through reports or meetings, but by living it. So he packed light, left his mansion behind, and walked into the life of a regular worker. He didn't tell anyone who he was. Not the manager, not the staff, not even the customers. He wanted to be treated like everyone else. At first, he struggled. Standing on his feet for hours hurt. Carrying trays full of plates tested his balance. Remembering orders and keeping up with the rush made him sweat more than any boardroom ever did. But he kept going. Every day taught him something new, though. Staff at the diner were mostly young people trying to get ahead. Some were students, some had kids, and others just needed a job that paid enough to keep the lights on. They worked long shifts, often missing meals themselves just to serve others. Tips helped, but not always enough. Daniel noticed how tired they looked, how they leaned against counters during slow moments, how they laughed not because things were great, but because it was easier than crying. He saw the way they supported each other, covering for someone who was late, sharing snacks when someone forgot lunch, helping clean up without being told. One night, as snow began to fall outside, a family walked in just before closing. A woman with 2 kids, a boy and a girl, soaked from the cold and clearly worn out. They sat near the window, shivering but trying to smile. The kids looked hungry. They ordered quietly, sticking to the cheapest items on the menu. When the bill came, the mother hesitated. She pulled out a few crumpled bills and coins, counting them over and over. It wasn't enough. She looked up nervously, eyes pleading, voice soft. "I'm sorry. I think I miscalculated." The waiter who served them, a guy named Jordan, stood there for a moment. Then, without a word, he reached into his own pocket, pulled out some cash, and handed it to the cashier. He smiled at the mother and said, "Don't worry about it. Enjoy your meal." The woman's eyes welled up. She whispered a thank you, barely audible over the noise of the kitchen. The kids didn't notice the tension, they were too busy eating. But Jordan made sure they each had dessert too, slipping them cookies with a wink. Daniel watched all of this from across the room. He didn't say anything. He just stared. That simple act, paying for strangers' dinner out of his own pocket, hit him harder than he expected. Later that night, after the diner closed and the staff began to leave, Daniel found himself walking beside Jordan. They didn't talk much, just shared the same path toward the bus stop. "You do that often?" Daniel finally asked. Jordan shrugged. "Sometimes. If someone really can't afford it, I figure it's better than watching them go hungry." "That's nice of you," Daniel said, choosing his words carefully. Jordan laughed a little. "Not really, just feels right, you know?" Daniel didn't answer. He just nodded. As they waited for the bus under the flickering streetlight, Daniel studied the man next to him. Jordan looked exhausted. Bags under his eyes, clothes slightly worn, but still smiling, still kind. That night back in his tiny rented apartment, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Jordan, about the family, about the dozens of employees who showed up every day, no matter how tired or broke they were. He thought about how far removed he had become from the people powering his business. He'd been so focused on growth and profit, he never stopped to ask what it cost them. Something inside him shifted that night. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do yet, but he knew he couldn't go back to the way things were. Next morning, he woke up with a plan forming in his mind. He still wore the same uniform, still punched in at the same time, still wiped tables and poured coffee. But now he wasn't just watching, he was learning, and soon he would act. The next few days at the diner felt like usual. Busy mornings, slow afternoons, and rush hours that made everyone move like lightning. Danny, still playing the part of the quiet new guy, kept doing his job, wiping tables, refilling drinks, and trying not to drop plates. But inside, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. That moment with Jordan and the family stayed stuck in his head. It wasn't just the money he gave. It was how he did it. Without making a big deal out of it. Like it was normal to help someone when they were down, so Danny started paying more attention. He watched how Jordan worked. He noticed how he always made time for people, even when he was tired. If a customer looked sad, Jordan would smile and say something kind. If another worker was stressed, he'd step in and help carry trays or take over a table. Danny also saw how hard Jordan worked outside the diner. One morning before his shift, Danny spotted Jordan walking fast through the cold, holding a worn backpack. He followed from a distance, not in a creepy way, just curious, and saw him go into a small community college building. So Jordan was a student too. Later that day, during a break, Danny sat beside him. "Going to school?" he asked casually. Jordan nodded while eating a sandwich. "Yeah, trying to finish my nursing program." Danny raised an eyebrow. "Nursing? That's tough." Jordan smiled a little. "It is, but I want to help people, always have." Danny didn't ask more, but he wanted to. He could see it in Jordan's face and the pressure, the effort, the sacrifice. Over the next week, Danny learned more piece by piece. Jordan lived alone in a small room above a shop. He used to live with his brother and sister. But after their parents passed away, he took care of them on his own. Now the kids were staying with a relative and Jordan was working every shift he could to save up. For school, for rent, for everything. Still, he never complained. Even when he was clearly exhausted, he showed up on time. Even when he skipped meals so he could afford books, he still had a smile ready for others. Danny started seeing the same kind of struggle everywhere. There was Lisa, who worked nights and cleaned offices in the mornings to pay for her son's medicine. There was Tom, who walked 2 miles to work every day because he couldn't afford a bus pass. And Maria, who often fell asleep on her break between shifts. They all had stories. Real ones. Not numbers on a report or lines in a budget. These were people, real people, us giving everything they had just to keep going. And yet, the pay barely covered rent. Health benefits were almost non-existent. Schedules changed last minute, making it hard to plan anything. They worked long hours but still struggled to make ends meet. Danny realized something heavy. The company he built, the one he thought was helping people, was actually making things harder for them. Not on purpose, not out of cruelty, just because he hadn't been looking close enough. He remembered how proud he was when Harvest Grill hit its first $1 million in profits. How excited he was when the chain opened its 10th location. He had believed success meant growth, expansion, and efficiency. But now, watching these workers, really watching, he saw a different kind of truth. Success shouldn't mean how much you earn. It should mean how much you lift others up. That night, Danny sat alone in his apartment staring at the ceiling. He thought about Jordan again, the way he gave money to a stranger, the way he carried his own burdens without letting anyone else feel them. He thought about the mother and her kids, how grateful she was for a meal, how relieved she was not to be turned away. And he thought about himself, how far removed he had become from the lives of the people who made his business run. He had spent years living in luxury, surrounded by meetings and reports, while the people doing the real work were barely surviving. A feeling grew inside him, not guilt exactly, but something stronger. Responsibility. He knew he couldn't change everything overnight, but he also knew he couldn't go back to pretending he didn't see it. He needed a plan, a real one, not just a speech or a donation, something that would change lives. For good. The next morning, Danny got up early, dressed quickly, and headed to the diner. He still wore the same uniform, still punched in at the same time, still wiped tables and poured coffee. But now, he wasn't just learning. He was preparing, because soon, everything was going to change. Danny kept working like nothing had changed. He still came in early, tied up his shoes, and took whatever shift they gave him. He smiled when he served people, cleaned tables without being told, and listened more than he talked. But inside, everything was different now. He couldn't stop thinking about the workers, their lives, and what they went through just to keep showing up. And he kept seeing Jordan, not just as a waiter, but as someone who gave more than he had, who helped others even when he was barely holding on himself. So Danny started asking questions, not out loud, not yet, but in his head. Why were people working so hard and still struggling? Why did the company pay so little when it was doing so well? Why didn't he know any of this before? He used to think success meant numbers. How many branches they had, how much money came in every month, how many customers walked through the doors. Now he wasn't so sure. Success, maybe, should be measured by something else. By how many people you helped along the way. By whether the people who built your business could afford to live with dignity. That thought stayed with him, growing stronger each day. One afternoon, while wiping down the counter during a slow moment, Danny overheard two co-workers talking quietly near the back. "I don't know if I can take another week like this," one said, voice low. "I'm working 6 days a week and still can't make rent." The other sighed. "Same here. My sister called last night. Her kid got sick and she can't afford medicine. I wanted to help, but I don't have anything left." Danny didn't say anything. He just kept cleaning, pretending he wasn't listening. But he heard every word, and he felt something deep in his chest. Shame. Not because they were poor, or because they needed help, but because he had the power to change things, and for too long he hadn't even tried. Later that evening, after closing up, Danny found himself walking home with Jordan again. The sky was clear, stars peeking through. The city lights and the air was colder than usual. "You ever think about quitting?" Danny asked suddenly. Jordan looked at him surprised. "Quitting what?" "This job. This grind. Everything." Jordan thought for a second. Then he shook his head. "No, not really." "Even when it's hard?" Danny pressed. "It's always hard," Jordan admitted. "But I can't quit. I've got stuff to finish, goals to hit, people depending on me." Danny nodded slowly. "What if you had help?" Jordan gave him a small smile. "Then maybe I wouldn't feel like I'm running out of steam all the time." They walked in silence for a bit. Then Danny asked, "What would help, really?" Jordan shrugged. "A better wage helps. Health coverage helps. Just knowing the schedule ahead of time so I can plan my life, that helps a lot more than people realize." Danny let that sink in. He thought about the company policies, how wages were set just above minimum wage, barely enough to cover basics, how health benefits were limited unless you worked full-time, which most couldn't because shifts were unpredictable, how bonuses were rare, promotions even rarer, and support almost non-existent. It was a system that kept people surviving, not thriving. And now Danny saw how broken it was. The next few days he kept watching, listening, learning. He noticed how tired everyone looked by Friday, how some skipped lunch so they could eat dinner, how others showed up late because they had no reliable transport, how some workers had to call in last minute because their kids got sick and there was no daycare. He realized something else too. These weren't lazy people. They were people trying to do their best with what little they had. People who deserved better, who earned better, and he had the power to give it to them. The idea began to form in his mind. What if he didn't just fix one thing? What if he changed everything? He knew it wouldn't be easy. The board would push back. Investors might worry. Costs would go up. But for the first time in a long time, Danny stopped thinking about profit margins and started thinking about people. Because if the company was built on their backs, then it should lift them up, not weigh them down. Still, he needed a plan, something big, something bold, something that couldn't be ignored. So he started writing notes, ideas scribbled on napkins, scraps of paper, even the back of receipts, raising wages across the board, offering free college tuition for employees, creating emergency funds for workers in crisis, providing real healthcare coverage, setting stable schedules so people could plan their lives, building support programs instead of just rules. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He'd need to convince the top team, the managers, the board. But how? He couldn't just walk into a meeting and say, "Hey, I've been working as a waiter for weeks and now I want to change everything." They wouldn't believe him, or worse, and they'd laugh. So he needed proof. He needed stories, real ones, from real people. He decided to talk to the staff, not as Danny the waiter, but as Danny the listener. He started asking quiet questions during breaks. What's the hardest part about this job? If you could change one thing, what would it be? Do you feel supported here? At first, people were hesitant. They didn't want to get in trouble. But soon they opened up. Lisa told him she once slept in her car after missing a bus late at night. Tom shared how he missed his niece's birthday because he had to work. Maria said she nearly quit after getting sick and having no paid leave. Danny wrote it all down. Every story mattered, every struggle counted, and every word made him more certain. This couldn't go on. The final piece of the puzzle came when he sat down with Jordan one evening after work. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Danny asked. Jordan looked at him like he was joking. "Where would I go? This is the only job I've got." "But what if you had options?" Danny pressed. Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Danny leaned in slightly. "What if I told you there was a way to make this place better? For everyone?" Jordan laughed a little. "You serious?" Danny nodded. Dead serious. For the first time, he considered telling Jordan the truth, that he wasn't just Danny the waiter, that he was Daniel Mercer, the man who owned the whole company. But he held back. Not yet. He needed one more thing. Proof that Jordan wasn't the only one willing to give everything for a better life. Proof that these workers deserved better. Proof that change was possible. So he kept going. Each day brought new stories, new struggles, new hope. And slowly, piece by piece, Danny built the case for change. He didn't know exactly how he'd pull it off, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was a mission. And soon, the world was going to hear about it. Of course, here's part 4 of your story, expanded to around 1,300 words, written in simple natural English, keeping it engaging, human-centered, and free from any policy-violating content. Let's continue the journey. Danny didn't sleep much that night. The plan was forming in his mind like a storm building over the city. Slow at first, then powerful and unstoppable. He had seen enough, heard enough, felt enough. He couldn't pretend he didn't know what was going on anymore. It was time to act. But how? Walking into a board meeting and saying, "Hey, I've been working as a waiter for weeks and now I want to change everything," wouldn't work. Not unless he had proof. Proof that would hit harder than numbers or reports ever could. So, he made a call. A private one. One that only a few people knew how to answer. Early the next morning, before the sun was fully up, Danny met someone outside the diner. A man dressed in a suit, looking out of place among the early workers and delivery trucks. They talked quietly for a few minutes. Then the man left. That same day, something unusual happened. A message came through the company system. All senior managers are to attend an emergency meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., location TBA. No details, just instructions, and they were clear. By late afternoon, the word spread through the diner. The big bosses were being called in. Something was happening. Nobody knew what, but everyone felt it. Something was about to change. The next morning, Danny stood behind the counter, tying his apron like always. But today, he wasn't just another worker. Today, he was preparing for something bigger than himself. The meeting was set to take place in the main dining area. Tables were pushed together, chairs lined up, and a small screen was brought in for presentations. The staff had no idea what was going on. They just knew not to clean the front area yet. At exactly 8 a.m., the doors opened. In walked a group of people, sharp suits, serious faces, phones buzzing nonstop. These were the top managers, the ones who made decisions without ever stepping inside a real diner. They looked around confused. This wasn't the usual conference room. There were no luxury hotels, no catered breakfasts, no polished floors, just a regular diner, with sticky menus and worn-out booths. One of them turned to the manager. "Where's Mr. Mercer?" Danny stepped forward. "I'm right here." There was silence. Some laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Danny didn't smile. He pulled off his cap, revealing the face they all recognized from company meetings and shareholder events. Gasps filled the room. "Is this some kind of prank?" one of them asked. Danny looked around, calm but firm. "No prank," he said. "I wanted you to see where the real work happens. So I brought you here." He walked to the center of the room. "I've been working here for weeks," he continued. Not as Daniel Mercer, the CEO, just as Danny. One of the waiters, one of the workers. Murmurs spread through the group. "You've been... what?" Danny ignored the shock. "I served food, cleaned tables, took orders, and more than anything, I listened." He looked at each of them. "I heard things you don't hear in meetings, things you won't read in reports." He paused. "I saw workers skipping meals so they could afford books, people walking miles to work because they can't afford transport, parents missing their kids' birthdays because they had to work, people getting sick and still showing up because they can't afford to stay home." His voice grew stronger. "This company is built on their backs, and we've done nothing but make it harder for them to stand." Silence fell again. Danny took a deep breath. "We talk about growth, expansion, profit margins, but if we're growing while our workers are barely surviving, what kind of success is that?" He pointed to the kitchen. "That cook has 2 jobs. He pointed toward the counter. That server hasn't taken a vacation in years." He turned back to the group. "These aren't problems we can ignore. They're problems we created. And now, it's time to fix them." One of the managers finally spoke. "Daniel, we understand the concern, but changing wages and benefits affects the entire budget. We have investors to consider." Danny cut him off gently. "I didn't come here to ask permission. I came to tell you what's happening." He walked to a small table and picked up a folder. "This is the plan. It includes wage increases across the board, free college tuition for employees who want to study, better healthcare coverage, stable schedules, paid leave, emergency funds for those in crisis." He placed the folder on the table. "It's not charity. It's investment. In our people. In our future." Another manager frowned. "This will increase costs significantly." Danny nodded. "Yes, but it will also increase loyalty, productivity, customer satisfaction, employee retention, all of which save money in the long run." He looked around the room. "I know you're worried. I know you'll say it's risky, but I've seen what happens when we ignore the people who keep this business running." He stepped back. "And I won't let it happen anymore." The room was quiet. No one moved. Finally, the head of operations spoke. "What do you need from us?" Danny smiled slightly. "Your support, your cooperation, and your help making this real." More murmurs. Then slowly, one by one, they started nodding. Not all at once, but one by one. It wasn't instant agreement, but it was movement, and that was enough. For now. Later that day, Danny stayed behind after the meeting. Most of the managers had left, returning to their offices with copies of the plan. Some looked unsure. Others looked thoughtful, but Danny didn't care. He had taken the first step. Now he needed to finish what he started. As he leaned against the counter, wiping it down one last time, Jordan walked in. "You okay?" Jordan asked. Danny nodded. "Yeah, just tired." Jordan gave him a look. "You sure? You seem different." Danny smiled. "Maybe I am." He looked at Jordan. "You remember that family you helped pay for dinner?" Jordan shrugged. "Yeah." "Why?" Danny leaned closer. "Because of them, I saw something I should have seen a long time ago." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Danny took a deep breath. "That the people doing the real work deserve more than just a paycheck." He looked around the diner. "They deserve respect, dignity, a chance to grow." Jordan didn't say anything for a moment. Then he smiled. "That sounds like a good thing." Danny nodded. "It is. And it starts now." Outside, the sun was setting. Inside, something new was rising. Change, real, honest, lasting change. And for the first time in a long time, Danny felt like he was doing something that mattered. Not for profit, not for power, but for people. The next few days were like a storm breaking over the city. It started with a small ripple. A news outlet picked up the story about the CEO who went undercover as a waiter and then changed his company overnight. Then another outlet covered. Then another. Soon everyone was talking. Social media lit up. People shared the story with headlines like, "CEO works as waiter, sees worker. Pay for family's meal, then changes everything." From diner table to boardroom. A billionaire's real-life lesson. This company just raised wages after boss lived like his workers. It wasn't just gossip or trending topics. It was something deeper. It was hope. And it spread fast. Inside the diner, things didn't change overnight, but they began to shift. Workers noticed emails coming through, new policies, better schedules, clearer rules. Some got calls from HR asking if they wanted to apply for the tuition program. Others received messages saying their health coverage had been upgraded. People talked. They smiled more, laughed more. They felt seen. Danny kept working like always, even though now people looked at him differently. Some whispered when he passed. Others gave him quiet nods like they knew something big had happened because of him. But Danny didn't want praise. He just wanted things to be better. One morning, while pouring coffee behind the counter, he saw Jordan walk in. Jordan looked different too. Less tired, more awake, like he'd slept for the first time in weeks. "You've been busy," Jordan said, leaning against the counter. Danny shrugged. "Just doing what I should have done a long time ago." Jordan smiled. "Well, people are noticing." Danny raised an eyebrow. "You included?" Jordan nodded. "Yeah, I got an email yesterday. They're paying for my school." Danny smiled but tried not to make a big deal out of it. "That's great," he said simply. Jordan studied him for a moment. "You really did all this, didn't you?" Danny looked down at the floor. "I just showed them what was already here. The rest was up to them." Jordan shook his head. "No, you made them see it. That's not nothing." Danny didn't answer right away. He just wiped the counter thinking. Then he said, "You ever think about what happens next?" Jordan frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we fixed one part of this. But there's more. Always is." Jordan thought for a second. "So what are you going to do?" Danny looked around the diner. "I'm going to keep listening, keep learning, and keep pushing." Jordan gave a small laugh. "You sound like someone who's not done yet." Danny smiled. "Not even close." Outside the diner, the changes rippled outward. Other companies started talking about fair wages. Some restaurant chains announced they were reviewing their own pay policies. A few even reached out to Harvest Grill asking how they pulled it off. News anchors debated the move on TV. Is this the future of business? one asked. Or just a feel-good stunt, another questioned. But the workers didn't care what the experts said. They cared that they could afford medicine again, that they could sleep in on weekends, that they didn't have to choose between rent and food anymore. For them, it wasn't theory. It was life, and it mattered. Even the customers felt it. They came in with smiles, saying things like, "Heard you're treating your staff better now," or "Glad to hear this place is doing the right thing." Some left bigger tips. Others just stayed longer, enjoying the warmth. The diner felt different now, not just like a place to eat, but like a place where people mattered. A week later, Danny stood outside the diner, watching the sun rise. He had meetings, today, real ones, not undercover ones. He had to talk to managers, answer questions, help roll out the changes across all locations. It wouldn't be easy. There would be pushback, resistance, maybe even some fights. But he was ready, because he had seen what was possible. He had seen it in Jordan, in Lisa, in Tom, in Maria, in every worker who showed up day after day, no matter how hard life was, and he had seen it in himself, in the man who once thought success was measured by money, power, and control. Now he knew better. Success wasn't about how much you earned. It was about how many lives you touched, how many people you lifted up, how many hearts you changed. As he walked back inside, Danny saw a familiar face at the door. It was the mother from that night, the one who couldn't afford dinner. She was holding her kid's hand, smiling. "We're here for breakfast," she said gently. Danny smiled back. "You know the drill." She laughed. "Yeah, but this time we can actually pay." Danny shook his head. "Still good to see you." She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Danny didn't say anything, just nodded. Because sometimes the best kind of thanks isn't loud. It's quiet, it's real, and it stays with you. Later that afternoon, Danny sat alone at a booth sipping coffee. He watched the staff work, laughing, chatting, helping each other without being told. He saw Jordan talking to a new hire, showing them the ropes. He saw Lisa walking with confidence instead of worry. He saw Tom take a real lunch break for once. And he smiled, because he realized something. This wasn't just a job. This wasn't just a company. This was a family. And he wasn't just the boss. He was part of it now, not because of his name, not because of his money, but because he chose to see, to listen, to change. And that, he thought, was the most powerful thing of all. 1 year later, the same diner stood where it always had, on that quiet corner of the city, tucked between a small shop and a bus stop. The sign outside still flickered a little when it rained, and the smell of fresh bread still filled the air when you walked through the door. But inside everything felt different, not flashy or perfect, just better, more alive, more like home. Danny walked in early that morning wearing the same uniform he had worn all those months ago. He still came by often, even though most people now knew who he really was. He wasn't here for meetings or reports. He was here because this place mattered, because these people mattered. As he stepped inside, someone waved at him from across the room. It was Jordan, taller somehow, even though he hadn't changed much physically. His eyes were brighter now, less tired. He was pouring coffee for a table, smiling as he talked to the customers. Not just doing his job, enjoying it. Danny walked over. "Back again?" Jordan asked, handing him a cup. Danny smiled. "Feels like I never left." Jordan nodded. "You didn't. Not really." They sat down at the booth together just like they used to after long shifts. "You finished your first year?" Danny asked. Jordan grinned. "Yeah, got good grades too." "That's great," Danny said, genuinely proud. "I couldn't have done it without the program," Jordan added. "And you know that." Danny shook his head. "I just opened the door. You walked through it." Jordan looked at him for a moment. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you never came here?" Danny thought about it. I'd still be rich, he said after a while. Still own the company, still live in that big house. But, Danny smiled slightly, but I wouldn't have known what really matters. Jordan raised his coffee cup a little. To learning the hard way then, Danny laughed. To that, outside the city moved fast. People rushed to work, kids ran to catch buses, and phones buzzed nonstop. But inside the diner, time felt slower, like it gave people a chance to breathe. Lisa was working today, her usual self, but with a little more joy in her step. She had taken a few days off recently, something she hadn't done in years. She told Danny once that paid leave was the best gift she had ever gotten. Tom had bought new shoes. Maria had brought her nephew in for lunch last week, and he had eaten like he hadn't seen food in weeks. Everyone was still working hard. But now, they had something else too. Hope. And not just hope. Support. That made all the difference. Later that day, Danny stood near the kitchen, watching the team work. New faces had joined, but the spirit remained the same. People still helped each other out, still smiled, still treated customers like family. He saw one of the younger workers helping an older man find a seat. He saw another giving a free cup of soup to a regular who looked like he hadn't eaten in a while. Danny didn't say anything, just watched, because this was what he had hoped for. Not just policies on paper, but kindness in action. Change that lived in people, not just rules. He felt a tap on his shoulder. It was the manager. Board, called, the manager said. They want to talk about expanding the tuition program. Danny raised an eyebrow. Really? The manager nodded. Yeah. They're seeing results. Productivity's up, turnover's down, morale's high. Danny smiled. That's how it works when you treat people right. The manager gave a small laugh. Didn't think I'd hear that from a CEO. Danny shrugged. Maybe more CEOs should spend time behind the counter. As the sun began to set, Danny took his usual spot in the back booth. He looked around the room. This wasn't just a diner anymore, it was a symbol of what could happen when someone chose to listen, when someone dared to see, when someone decided that success meant more than money. Across the room, Jordan sat down beside him, still thinking. About next steps? Jordan asked. Danny nodded. Always. Jordan leaned back. What's next then? Danny sipped his coffee before answering. We keep going. We help more people. We make sure this isn't just one company's story. We make it part of something bigger. Jordan smiled. Sounds like a mission. Danny chuckled. Guess it is. They sat there quietly for a while, just watching the world move around them. A mother walked in with her kids, laughing as they tried to decide what to order. An old man sat alone in the corner, sipping tea and reading a newspaper. Two students shared fries and whispered about exams. Life happened in that diner. Real life, the kind of life that couldn't be faked or forced. And in the middle of it all, Danny sat with a full heart, because he had learned something powerful, that sometimes the only way to understand people is to walk beside them. Not above them, not behind them, beside them. And once you do that, once you truly see, you can never go back, not without changing something, not without trying to make things better. Danny had come into this place as a boss. Now, he stayed because he was part of something bigger, a team, a community, a movement, and maybe, just maybe, a new way forward. As the lights dimmed and the night shift got ready to take over, Danny stood up. Time to go? Jordan asked. Danny looked around one last time. Nah, he said. I think I'm just getting started. And with that, he walked toward the front counter, ready to pour another cup of coffee, ready to serve one more person. Because leadership, he realized, wasn't about titles or power. It was about showing up every day for the people who matter most.